This PeopleSoft Spotlight video describes the transition of your leased assets to the new lease accounting guidance for FASB ASC 842 and IFRS 16. To transition to the new accounting standards, an activity guide has been created and is the central point where you will execute the required tasks. There are 5 sections to the activity guide, which is the main focus of this video. For additional information, a red paper and FAQ document is available on my Oracle support. PeopleSoft's approach to complying with the new standard is to create new product functionality that can be shared between asset management and lease administration. To accomplish this, PeopleSoft enhanced the lease administration product to be compliant with the new guidance. These enhancements were released in Update Image 24. Next, in the subject of this video, PeopleSoft created functionality to migrate asset management leases to the lease administration product. This is then followed by the transition of all leases to the new accounting standard. If you report under GASB, you should not proceed with the data migration and transition at this time. Enhancements to support the new GASB standards are being reviewed for a future image. You do not need to license lease administration to be compliant as a lessee. Organizations who license asset management, or AM, will have access to the core accounting functionality for payables leases, otherwise known as lessee agreements. In addition, they will be able to enter multiple financial terms and use the straight-line accounting process as well as other features. Organizations who license lease administration, or LA, will have everything available to AM licensees, plus access to clauses, options, operating expenses, percent rent, and additional functionality. The LA license also provides access to lessor accounting. The first step in the activity guide is to assess leased assets in AM. This includes reviewing and updating existing leased assets. Access the Lease Migration pagelet where you will find the activity guide. The activity guide is comprised of 34 tasks, the first task being the initial assessment of leases in asset management.
Use this migration page to review the AM leases that are being migrated to LA. Partially migrated leases apply to organizations who license lease administration and who also have leases in AM. The system processes these leases differently during the migration by populating the remaining fields in the LA data structure. Use the Missing Property Details page to update AM property leases with square footage and other property-related attributes required in LA. This completes your initial assessment of AM leases.
The second section of the activity guide is to configure LA to work with AM leases. This applies to AM customers who are implementing shared product functionality with lease administration. In this section, you'll prepare LA for the migration of AM leases.
Use the Amendment Types page to create amendment types for use in LA. LA uses amendment processing to track changes to a lease after lease activation. When you create an amendment, you first select an amendment type and an amendment reason code. Use the Schedules page to create payment schedules for future use in LA. This is an example of AM and LA sharing product functionality. The schedule configuration functionality used in LA is common to many PeopleSoft products, and it is much more robust than what is available in AM. This example shows the configuration for a payment made on the 15th of the month. Frequency is monthly, day of the month is 15, and all months of the year are selected. You can create other schedules for payments made daily, weekly, annually, or user-defined. This task provides an opportunity to create the payment schedules now, which you will eventually use in LA when you modify a lease. You do not need to create every possible payment schedule that you'll ever need. However, you should create payment schedules that you expect to use most often. Use the Transaction Routing Codes page to create transaction routing codes. Transaction routing codes are used to identify taxes and process accounting. Use the Lease Administration Business Unit Definition page to create your LA business units. Every lease will be migrated to an LA business unit. In the Business Unit section, Select the related General Ledger business unit. This determines the AAM business units that you can select from. Next, select the related AAM business unit. For data migration, the AAM business unit helps to determine the LA business unit assigned during migration. In the simplest scenario, you can create a one-to-one mapping by adding a new LA business unit for every existing AAM business unit. In the Thresholds for Lease Classification section, you configure the thresholds used for classifying a lease as finance. In this example, the lease is classified as finance if the lease term is 75% or more of the asset's useful life, or if the present value of the total lease payments is 90% or more of the asset's fair value. Business units reporting under IFRS are identified. The system classifies all IFRS leases as finance. On the Transaction Setting tab, assign the routing codes. Use the Role Types page to create role types in LA. At minimum, you should create 2 new role types, one with a role category for Internal Administrator and one with a role category for Internal Manager. Use the Lease Administration Roles page to assign roles to your users. Assign the Internal Administrator role to Lease Administrators and assign the Internal Manager role to Portfolio Managers. Use this page to review assets in the interface table. Select the AAM Work Center to review pending transactions and exceptions under My Work. You should complete processing for all open transactions before migration. Use the LA Business Unit Mapping page to review and confirm the LA Business Unit being assigned to your AAM leases. The AAM Business Unit that is assigned to the LA Business Unit when you created it determines the LA Business Unit for migration. If you have a one-to-one mapping of AAM Business Unit to LA Business Unit, then there is nothing to do on this page. Simply ensure the LA Business Unit field is populated. In this example, AAM Business Unit US 001 was mapped to only one LA Business Unit, US 001, so the column is read-only. The LA Business Unit field will have a prompt that you must complete if your AAM Business Unit is mapped to multiple LA Business Units. Use this page to create lease types, region codes, lease administrators, and portfolio managers, which are required fields in lease administration. Assign one as the default value for your leases. If you have interim rents in AAM, you must create and assign a default value for these as well. Use this page to update information on your leases individually or en masse. Updates can include lease type, region code, lease administrator, and lessor, which are all required fields in lease administration. The data migration process will use these updates in lieu of the default values identified in the prior task. In other words, if you do not update the lease information on this page, then the data migration will use the default values identified in the previous task. In addition, you must select a lessor for each of your leases. The vendor ID from AAM should display. However, if vendor is blank in AAM, then you must enter it on this page.
The third section in the activity guide is to run the migration process. This includes copying existing AAM lease information to the LA data structure and reviewing the results online.
Use the AAM Leases migration page to run the data migration process. Please remember that you do not have to migrate all of your assets at one time. Instead, you can migrate a certain population of assets first, review the migrated assets online in lease administration, and then return to this page to migrate your remaining assets. Incomplete information will prevent you from migrating an asset. Use the Errors link to view errors, take action to resolve, and then rerun the migration for an asset. Use the listed reports to compare a count of leases in AAM to a count of leases migrated to LA. This includes a summary by business unit and payment type, as well as row counts in lower-level tables in lease administration. Use this page to perform an asset-level online review of your leases migrated into LA. Use the Detail 1 and Detail 2 tabs to review lease-level attributes. You can select the lease number link to open the lease in Lease Administration. Use the Detail 3 tab to review the payment types created for the lease. Select the Base Rent link to review the payment schedule for the lease. In this example, only a base rent was created.
Other leases may have purchase options, penalty options, and interim rate payment schedules.
This completes the tasks related to data migration. The next section of the activity guide prepares system configuration needed to transition to the new accounting standards. This includes tasks to review and update lease configuration so that your leases are ready to be accounted for under the new leasing guidance. Most tasks prepare your operating leases to be capitalized. Tasks in this section impact both AM and LA leases.
Use the Identify Transition Date page to identify the date your organization will adopt the new accounting standard.
When you transition operating leases to the new accounting standard, lease payments dated on or after this date will be included in the initial costs of the leased asset. This date can be changed after saving the page if necessary. Use the Miscellaneous Rent Types page to review and adjust when necessary the Include in Lease Payments selection for miscellaneous rent types. This is an important selection. A miscellaneous rent that has the Include in Lease Payments checkbox selected will be included in the capitalized cost of the leased asset. Carefully consider the impact of updating this selection on an existing miscellaneous rent that is already being used on both operating and finance leases. You may want to create a new miscellaneous rent and modify your existing operating leases to use the new rent. This task applies primarily to organizations who license lease administration. However, it also applies to organizations licensing only AM if you began using miscellaneous rents after migrating leases to lease administration. Similar to the prior task, use the Operating Expense Categories page to review and adjust when necessary the Include in Lease Payments selection for operating expenses. An operating expense that has the Include in Lease Payments checkbox selected will be included in the capitalized cost of the leased asset. Use the Lease Exceptions portion of this page to review and resolve 3 exceptions for lease payments dated after your transition date. Links appear only if there is an exception to resolve. You should review the Oracle Red Paper associated with data migration and transition under My Oracle Support for detail on how to review and resolve these exceptions. This task applies to leases initiated in lease administration and to AM leases that were modified after being migrated to LA. This step is critical to ensure an accurate calculation of initial cost on your operating leases. Use the Categories page to modify existing asset categories or create new asset categories for operating lease assets. Under the new accounting standards, you amortize the cost of operating lease assets. You do not depreciate them. Identify categories for operating leases as non-depreciable. In the Options section, select Leased Assets. Related Lease Category is a new attribute available in the system after you transition to the new accounting standard. It can be used if the lease classification changes from operating to finance or vice versa. Use the Definition page to create new asset profiles for your operating leased assets. New profiles should have an acquisition code of leased, capitalized asset selected, and a depreciation status of non-depreciable. Be sure to identify a default asset category. In a subsequent task, you will update the asset profile and asset category for operating leased assets using the profiles created during this task. Use the Asset Profile and Category page to update operating leases. This task applies to leases originating in LA primarily, but it also applies to AM leases that do not have an asset profile. Asset profiles and categories are required on all operating leases before they can be capitalized. To update assets en masse, select a new asset profile. The new asset category defaults into the page based on the asset profile configuration. Then select specific assets to update in the grid. You can update the profile, category, or both. Use the borrowing rate defaults page to define your organization's incremental borrowing rates. To calculate asset costs for your operating leases, the system locates an incremental borrowing rate based on your lease start date.
If your organization does not intend to restate prior period financial reports, then you should enter a rate as of your transition date.
The effective date should be earlier than the earliest start date on your operating leases. In this example, the organization has a 4% rate as of their transition date in 2019. The effective date on this page is 1/1/1900 to ensure that the same 4% rate is used on all leases transitioning to the new accounting standard. If you report under IASB, the effective date entered on this page should be your transition date. Use the lease interest rate page to confirm the suggested interest rate used to calculate asset cost on your operating leases. The first time you open this page, the system populates the suggested rate based on your incremental borrowing rate, the start date of the lease, and whether you report under FASB or IASB. You can also manually update the rate to another number. Either way, the system uses the number in the suggested interest rate column to calculate asset cost. Be sure to save the rate on this page. You can refresh the suggested interest rate by entering a value of 0, selecting leases in the grid, and then select Update All. Use the Lease Payment Type Update page to update the payment type selection for your operating leases. This task should apply to leases originating in LA. When the arrears and advanced functionality was added to lease administration in Image 19, all lease payments were set to arrears. Use this task to update the payment type to advance where it may be required. The advance and arrears selection affects the interest calculation and the initial cost of your operating lease assets. Use this Run Control page to summarize lease payment information for your operating leases. This process populates a reporting table summarizing the remaining lease payments on your operating leases. In this case, payments dated 1/1/2017 and later. After running the process, review the value of your operating leases on your transition date at points in time prior to your transition date. In this example, you can review cost information at points in time as early as 2017. Select View Log for a listing of leases processed. Use this pivot grid to review a summary of remaining lease payments as of a specified date. Enter a date and business unit in the prompts window. In this example, the pivot grid summarizes the remaining payments as of 1/1/2019. Amount represents the full amount or undiscounted amount of the remaining payments. Obligation represents the discounted amount of your remaining payments. Interest represents the interest portion of your remaining payments. Select any of the numbers in the pivot grid to see detailed payment information for the lease. Use the Lease Details page to review your operating leases before they transition to the new accounting standard. Select the lease number link to open a specific lease for review. This is the last task to prepare for the transition to the new accounting standard. The final section of the activity guide is the actual transition to the new standard. In this section, you will indicate that you are now applying the new accounting standard. You'll add new accounting configuration to support processing under the new standard. And you'll assign cost distributions and then run a process to capitalize your operating leases. Use the Apply ASC 842 page to indicate that you are ready to apply the new accounting standards. Note, you cannot change this selection after saving the page. Make this selection after you have completed final processing under the old accounting standards. After making this selection, you must complete a number of tasks rather quickly before beginning to process transactions using the new accounting standard. Use the Cost Types page to create 3 cost types in AM: rent expense, lease incentives, and lease remeasurement. This is the first step in using the new shared accounting functionality in lease administration. Use the accounting templates in Mass page to create new accounting entry templates. These templates will be used with the new standard. Create new accounting entry templates for accumulated amortization, lease incentives, lease remeasurement, rent expense, and rent expense contra. Use the Update Asset Cost Accounting Distribution page to update the cost distribution for operating leases. For AM leases, open the cost distribution and confirm the accounts to use going forward. Accounts default from the AM accounting entry templates, but you can override them. Either way, you must open the cost distribution for each asset to complete this task. For leases originating in lease administration, identify the detailed general ledger chart fields for the asset and the accounts. You must update the cost distribution before capitalizing the asset. After completing all of the previous tasks, use the Select Leases to Transition page to capitalize operating leases. You can capitalize leases individually or en masse by selecting assets in the grid. Before running the process, be sure you have reviewed the cost of operating leases as of your transition date using the Transition Analytics Pivot Grid. Incomplete information prevents you from capitalizing an asset. Select the Errors Detail link to review the reasons. The capitalization process updates many data fields in AM and LA and cannot be reversed. Use the Generate Straight Line Schedule page to generate straight line amortization schedules for operating leases. You must run this process to create the monthly expense amounts for operating leases. You can run the process for a specific lease or an entire business unit.
For additional resources and a more detailed explanation of the tasks in this activity guide, you can review the Oracle Red Paper under My Oracle Support. You can also review PeopleSoft Online Help for Asset Management and Lease Administration, which is available on the information portal at PeopleSoftInfo.com.